Humans have been on this planet for about 300,000 years, but we've only started polluting like this in the last 60. Our pollution stays in the air for thousands of years, creating a thickening blanket that traps heat into the atmosphere. This heat causes stronger hurricanes, bigger fires, more frequent floods, and the extinction of thousands of species. But the impacts from our pollution are not only felt on a global scale or in the far future, they're also felt for each and every one of us today. In summer 2019, while working on ways to redesign public spaces here in Tel Aviv that are vulnerable to extreme heat, here's what I found in a park in the south of the city. 70 degrees Celsius on the surface and 50 on the slide. Just a few months later, my 2-year-old daughter and her best friend were hospitalized with burns after climbing a similar slide in a park right near my house. Continuing this pollution trend means that our cities will look and feel just like these photos. So to stop this pollution blanket, we just have to stop polluting, right? How do we do that? Well, the energy sector is responsible for more than 70% of humanity's pollution. So the main pathway to stop polluting is to rethink and plan how we make and use our energy resources. But when we reimagine a healthier energy system, we're actually facing with a dilemma, which is a trilemma. Ensuring that we stop pollution is one important objective, but it needs to be it needs to be in balance with two equally important objectives. Our system needs to be environmentally sustainable, but also secure and equitable. So, what do we have in mind? Well, environmental sustainability asks, can we live with it? As we saw, ensuring a clean energy supply means that we can save tremendous suffering for people and ecosystems today and in future generations. Energy security asks, can we count on it? Ensuring that we have enough supply and infrastructure for our energy needs so that we can function properly on a daily basis. Energy equity asks, can we all afford it? Ensuring that energy markets can supply our energy at affordable prices for everyone without leaving anyone behind. Nevertheless, obtaining each one of these objectives can sometimes produce unnecessary trade-offs between each objective. For example, a secure power system entails large investments, and that may increase energy prices and infringe energy equity. Similarly, clean solar energy can't necessarily supply all our energy needs because the sun doesn't shine all day and all year, and so that may risk our energy security. So we need to rethink about energy. The good news is it's already happening. Let's take a look at what's happening. How these changes are happening in the electricity sector. Well, the electricity system is based on dozens of assets that are balancing the grid, and this system is centrally organized to supply where power producers produce our energy at power plants, utilities transport it through transmission and distribution lines, and suppliers sell it to the consumers. Our power flow basically drives in one unidirectional way. Until recently in Israel, all these players were actually one. For us as consumers, the address was always Chevrat Chashmal. But the new system will look entirely different. Now we can produce energy from solar rooftops, we can fuel our cars with power from our homes and our offices. So thanks to digital applications, we can optimize and manage our own electric devices. The new system becomes from being centrally organized to a decentralized system. Here, from passive consumers, we're becoming active prosumers, producers and consumers, that are much more involved in the energy market. This means that this new architecture until it becomes from just a few players that supply and manage our system to millions of new communities, businesses, and individuals that can consume but also generate, store, and even sell electricity services back to the utilities or to our peers. Thanks to the massive entrance of new technologies called distributed energy resources, or DERs, those technologies are distributed generation, distributed storage, such as batteries, generation in solar and wind, electric vehicles, and digital technologies and smart technologies such as smart inverters and sensors and smart meters, which can basically integrate between the other resources. That's what enables us to for this new system. And these new technologies, what they do is actually they provide new services and business models such as virtual power plants and peer-to-peer energy, peer-to-peer trading platforms that actually replace the need to construct new big fossil fuel power plants. So as you can see, this new system is much more locally organized, and managing it correctly means that we have much more communities and resource sharing. And if you're thinking that these changes are not necessarily going to affect you directly or soon enough, I want to share with you how projections predict how these changes or resources will integrate into our homes. This graph shows the penetration of significant technologies over the years in US households. It took about 40 years for electricity and private cars to penetrate our homes, about 35 for air conditioners and dishwashers, and about 15 for the internet. And similarly, those new resources, those energy resources, are expected to increasingly integrate into our homes at a faster rate. So, when is this going to happen to you? Well, I couldn't help myself but share with you when and how it happened to me just while working on this presentation. I bought this really cool new electric scooter. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that while DERs, market penetration, is just around the corner, the planning of the future energy system still uses traditional centralized planning methods. The trajectories and the models that those planning methods use are assessing with different parameters that may well be no longer relevant. And this is a critical problem because energy system planning is basically the directing factor for how these new resources will integrate into our lives. So my research question is how future energy systems can address environmental sustainability, energy security, and energy equity, maintaining this careful balance of the trilemma in the context of new, clean, distributed, and smart energy resources is a challenging knowledge gap. It also can have some unclear trade-offs, but if we need a cleaner and better energy system, we must address this question. So what I'm trying to achieve here is first to map the implications of these new resources, that will allow me to define a modified energy system model and assess properly the trilemma dimensions. And together that can enable to improve energy planning because we can better utilize those resources towards reaching our critical objectives. How am I going to do this? Well, this research question also requires a diverse set of evidence types and knowledge gaps. So I'm using a mixed set of methods. For collecting the data, I'm using a systematic literature review, interviews with experts, surveys, and also collecting techno-economic data and physical data. To develop the assessment framework, I'm using energy system modeling software and also integrating multi-objective models and assessments and the value tree. And to analyze this new model on case studies, I'm using scenarios and a cost-benefit analysis. I quickly want to share with you some of the first outcomes of this research, where I'm trying to, and my first objective, where I'm trying to shed light on that transition blind spots. So We're used to asking, can we live with it by looking at coal, oil, and gas and looking what it does to our air. We're used to looking at these fuels to ask, can we count on it, and look at the deposits we have and how much we need to import. And to see if we can afford it, we're usually looking at the fuel prices, those fuels prices and electricity prices. But we need clean energy, right? This means that we need massive supplies of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, electric vehicles, etc. And all these technologies entail massive increases in materials such as cobalt, lithium, graphite, and other raw materials. This means that the energy transition needs to ask, for reaching its trilemma, it needs to ask new questions for new areas such as minerals. So here we can ask, can we live with it? And don't just look up at the air, but also down on the ground. Look what it does to our soil and water, and how we can reuse and recycle our materials. To see if we can count on it, we need to look at how much materials we have and how much we need for our energy transition. 98% of the EU's raw materials for its energy transition actually depends on China. To make sure that we can all afford it, just moving from one energy system to another won't cut it. Here, we need to rethink how we're doing business and how we can reduce our energy needs, but without compromising on basic human rights and open societies. So basically, you can say that my day job is to try and predict the future, which is kind of weird, right? I mean, if I asked you, what would you be doing 10 years from now? There's no way of knowing. But what you do know is that each one here won't be working on the same stage of their PhD as they are right now. I really hope not, really hope not. So, yes, trying to look at a reality that doesn't necessarily exist is kind of crazy. But what I learned from Doc Brown here is that looking at the future as if it was the present is even crazier. So, looking at the energy future and its blind spots, I believe that we can make our future a better one. Thank you.
Really nice talk. So, from your perspective, what is the largest technological advancements that need to be made in order to make these systems really, yeah?
That's a great question. I think that the technological advancement, first of all, in the area of storage, we have a lot of where to develop and how. But I think that the technological developments are already here, not necessarily that's not the main problem. The main problem is how we manage and integrate these new technologies in larger scales. And I think that looking at it from a local perspective, because that's how the new architecture looks like, that's the main challenge. I'll give you a quick example. We know how much storage or clean power we need for, I don't know, for a country when we're looking at the future, in order to transition to what's called net zero. But the problem is that there are many new players that need to now know about energy and what it needs to do, such as municipalities and companies. So that's a big issue over there. But also, when we're talking just about technology, the technological advancements, so I could say basically the first one is storage and the new ways of storage, because there's many, not just lithium, and now we're coming up with great new technologies, and also how to recycle and reuse and manage them correctly, as I said earlier. But also looking at the digital technologies and platforms, those also are not integrating fast enough.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi, thanks for the talk. We saw, for example, that nuclear energy was in decline, and suddenly the war in Europe caused it to change. And my question is whether in the future there will be still a single point of failure for these new types of technology, like we saw for energy prices and the war in Europe, and again. So will it be more diverse? Will it be susceptible to a single point of failure? The new era we're going to.
That's exactly the point of view that I'm trying to look at. I think that you mentioned two areas. You talked a little bit about nuclear. Here I didn't include nuclear energy because when you look at it from both a very local perspective or a very global one, nuclear is on a global one. It's a part of the energy mix, but it really depends on where and how it will evolve, and that's one question. And I'm not sure I'm not sure I can have enough time to talk about it. I'll be happy to talk with you about it a little later. But on the other side, yes, the answer is definitely yes. If we continue with the regular way of how we do business, that's the example of the critical raw materials that the EU depends on China. You just mentioned the Russia and the Russia issue. So here we can see how Europe was dependent on Russian gas and what happened. And now what happens is pretty much the same. What evolves is the same thing with China, and that's why Western countries such as the US and Europe are now rethinking about how to use their supply chains and how to do business, but not necessarily fast enough or good enough.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I was wondering, you said your research has to do with the blind spots with regard to energy, sustainability, equity, and security. And I was wondering, from the equity perspective, you framed it in terms of affordability. And I was thinking if you could, I was wondering if you can expand more in terms of accessibility.
Sure.
And what that means for Israel, in our larger conflict context. There are also implications, or regionally, if you can reflect on
Sure.
the blind spots there.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I was just mentioning one side of the energy equity. Each one of these dimensions is pretty much diverse, and actually the literature, but also policy, kind of takes each one of these dimensions to many different ways areas. So for accessibility, just for an example for everyone here, I'll give you an example, like a reality check for everyone here. Whoever in Israel, but also in the United States, for example, whoever has solar rooftops or electric vehicles right now are pretty much the richer populations. And what happens is that these new technologies integrate into our societies. So first, the rich people buy it, and then what they usually do, because how the electricity system works, they can actually get out of the electricity system. And who pays for electricity services in the bigger, in the wider system, are the poorer populations. And that's a very big market failure. So that's one type of accessibility. But other accessibility is accessibility to clean energy in general. If the market is very centralized, you can't choose which type of energy you can buy and at which prices. So that's also an accessibility. It's not necessarily that you can buy clean energy. So that's another type. And you talked about specific populations. So accessibility to electricity in general is it's a major problem, and not a lot of people are aware of, but there are thousands of people in Israel who are not connected to the grid, such as the Bedouin populations, and it becomes very political, and I don't want to get into it too much, but it's a fact that people here just don't get their basic electricity. So definitely an energy equity side of the coin. And but what I'm trying to do in this research is look at the new questions and implications from the new resources and how they can improve accessibility or risk them.
Hi. So I have a question about the transition state that you're talking about. Because like any transition between two stable states, you talk about the trilemma as an equilibrium, but the equilibrium gets disrupted just for the transition state, no matter what happens. But I don't think it's treated as really an equilibrium, because from what I can see and hear about it is that either sometimes, like you said now, equity is being sacrificed to preserve security or sustainability, which happens a lot is that sustainability is being sacrificed because say, okay, we'll use less and less oil, but we'll continue to use fossil fuels until the market is big enough. And I've never heard about sacrificing security to maintain energy sustainability. Is that something that you will look at, or is it? Does anybody think about even sacrificing security for just this period?
Great question. What I wanted to show, and I wasn't sure that it would be enough time, about the minerals issue, is that when you think about one side of the coin, such as environmental sustainability, in one way of thinking about it, like the energy transition needs to be clean, but that's not the only problem, as we can see in Europe. The energy transition needs to be also energy independent. So that's one side of the coin. But when you look too much, when you're too much focused on one side, things are starting to happen on the other dimensions, and that's when it may risk you. That's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that it's very context dependent. Looking at what energy security is in different geographies is very different, and same thing with energy security. Germany thought it had pretty much a clear energy security pathway, but it wasn't. It's not, and so and the same thing with environmental sustainability. So I think that it's always a balance. It's a delicate balance, but it's definitely not a perfect state. But I think that different geographies have different contexts, and you can reach, like you said, something very true about energy security, because that's how we're raised. First of all, we need to take care of our energy security. That's definitely a political side of the coin, because politicians, as long as when they're in position, or decision makers, doesn't matter. It's not just policy makers, it's leaders. When they're in position, they want to ensure that you're secure and safe, and then other things start to risk you. That's why what is energy security is also kind of a big question that we need to ask, but that's a different area for this conversation.
Thank you to Omri. Well done.